Hello and welcome to our fourth and final live stream for prospective students to our degree programs at the Energy and Resources Group here at UC Berkeley. I'm David Anthoff. I'm a professor in ERG, and I'm also the chair of the admissions committee, and so I organize these live streams. So welcome everyone. Glad to see that so many of you have tuned in. At least for us this morning. Before I welcome our two guests for this live stream today, I just want to give a few final logistical points, and then we'll dive into our guests. So first of all, this is our last of 4 live streams. So after this one, the support channels and ways for you to have questions answered will be different. In particular, if you have more questions after this live stream, then please email our support email for prospective students, and you can find that email on our ERG webpage. It's erggrad@berkeley.edu, and Julian and Candice are going to respond to emails on that question that you might have about our programs from now until the deadline for admissions, for applications. So that's sort of how we are shifting our questions. We got a fair number of questions in the run-up to this stream that were of logistical nature, so they were not really about the work that the faculty here do. we're not going to cover those questions here today in the live stream, because these live streams with faculty are really about the work that's happening here and less about details of the application process. But we do want to help you with these questions, and so we encourage you to just send an email to that email address on our homepage and get them answered that way. So that's in terms of logistics. Just another final reminder, we've done 3 of these live streams before. They are all recorded, and you can watch them on YouTube, the recordings of those. So if you want to see the conversations I had with the other core faculty here in ERG, or the first live stream where we talked about a lot of the logistics of the admissions process, then please watch those videos. Then they are a great resource, I think, for your application. So that's all I had in terms of logistics. And with that, I just want to introduce my two guests today. And that is Youjin Chung and Andy Jones. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks, David. Nice to be
Thanks.
here.
Yeah, good to be here.
So they are both professors here in ERG. We will talk about their research and their work here today. And one thing that is a little bit different today than in previous live streams is that we're also going to talk about my work today. So I play a dual role today of being the host of this stream, and then I'm also going to ask myself questions, which might be somewhat awkward, but that's the model that we'll do today. All right, I think with that, why don't we just jump into our format. The format will be that I have prepared 4 themes that I want to talk about, where each of us 3 will say a couple of words about that. And we'll go through this. And then at the same time, we're monitoring the YouTube chat. And if you have any questions, please ask them in the chat, and then we'll try to answer those in between these 5 segments that I had prearranged. So please do ask questions in the chat. The best type of questions are questions that are specific sort of to the 3 of us. We'll try to answer any question, but ideally it would be questions that are specific to what we work on or things like that, and less questions about how many pages should my statement of something be, because I think we covered most of those type of questions in the first live stream already. So if you have those kinds of questions, I encourage you to just watch that recording. Okay, with that, why don't we jump into my first topic, and that is we'll start with just talking about what type of research we're doing here. And Eugene, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I can say a little bit about my research. So I'm a sociologist and geographer, and I'm interested in questions of agrarian environmental change, international development, land and resource politics, and gender and intersectionality in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly Tanzania and East Africa. And my work over the past several years has been really motivated by a puzzle or question of how capitalist processes and public policies that aimed to deliver socio-environmental benefits often reproduce social inequalities or marginalize the very groups they intend to serve. So in the context of Tanzania in East Africa where I work, these groups have often been rural women, ethnic minorities, and other communities who depend on land, water, and forests for their lives and livelihoods. I'm also interested in how these people experience, negotiate, and contest some of these socio-environmental change that are happening on the ground. And so within this broad research program or framework, I work on 3 different projects currently, and I can touch upon these individual projects very briefly. So the first project, I've been working on it for the past decade, looks at the phenomena of global land grabbing or the contemporary scramble for land in Africa. And I'm completing a book right now that focuses on the gendered politics surrounding a large-scale transnational land deal in Tanzania, which after 10 years of negotiations have never become operational, but nonetheless had produced some real consequences for those living on the land. The second project focuses on the phenomena of livestock revolution, or the rising demand for meat and dairy in Africa and the attendant transformation of livestock production systems and pastoral landscapes and livelihoods. And so this project looks into particularly the role of animal science and technology, particularly around animal genetics and breeding, and asks how ideas about gender, race, species, and science become entangled in the discourse and practice of livestock intensification. And the third project, which is in the very early stages development, and it's linked to my first project and has to do with the socio-environmental implications of for the mining of rare earth elements, or REE, in Africa. So these elements are materials that are used in mobile phones, laptops, military devices, and the global supply of which has been dominated by China to date. And so investors in the north are increasingly seeking to diversify their supply of mineral resources in Africa, leading to a new enclosures or new resource scramble in the continent. As a primarily a qualitative researcher, the empirical methods I use in my work are ethnography. This includes direct and participant observation. I also conduct in-depth interviews, archival research, as well as participatory methods, including community mapping and participatory photography. And I'd be happy to talk more about these if people have questions for follow-up.
Great, thank you, Eugene. This is really fascinating. And I think maybe we'll just jump right on to Andy. Same question for you. Do you want to say a few words about your research?
Sure, yeah. So first of all, I want to say I have one foot at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, where I'm a earth scientist, and also another foot in ERG as a faculty member. And my work kind of spans these worlds of looking at using Earth system science tools to understand human-environment interactions. So things like the interaction between agricultural systems and the atmosphere, or how urban environments create microclimates and lead to issues related to resilience in the context of environmental extremes. And then also take a lens, sort of a social science lens, to look at how is the information and data from the earth sciences used to inform decision-making in practice, and how can we improve that process and create feedbacks from understanding the use of knowledge back to that generation of knowledge. And a lot of this plays out in the context of climate change, climate adaptation and resilience, as well as thinking about the trade-offs involved in land use management as a tool for decarbonization. So a couple of projects that I'm currently involved in. One is called the Hyperfacets Project. It's a large effort to understand climate and weather extremes, but doing so in this way that we've been engaging deeply with water managers across the US to understand sort of what keeps them up at night, and how can science better inform the planning that they're trying to do to prepare for climate change. We're also recently started a project with the California Energy Commission to develop something called the CalAdapt Analytics Engine. So this is going to be a data platform that enables users to work with climate data in ways to process the data and produce more kind of decision relevant outcomes for them. And then right now, kind of a new area that's just kind of, we're working on proposals and developing concepts related to urban resilience, and maybe doing a big case study on Oakland, California as a place to examine both kind of theoretical ideas about how urban systems co-evolve through time, and also very kind of practice-oriented engagements with community members so that science can help create more resilience. It's probably enough to say for now.
Okay, great, cool, Andy. Actually, one thing that we should probably mention, that Andy has there's a twist to Andy's story, that he's a faculty at ERG now, but he has another relationship with ERG in that he used to be you got your PhD here in ERG, right?
That's right.
A few years ago?
Yes. Right. So maybe you get a sense of that interdisciplinarity woven into my work.
Yeah. So he has sort of another perspective of about ERG, of having been a student, even though that is probably, I don't know when that was, but it's probably long enough ago that a lot of things have changed by now. All right, so maybe then I guess the next part is that I ask this question to myself. Eugene and Andy, if I ramble on too long, one of you just needs to step in and stop me somehow. I don't know. I have all the buttons here, but you can. So I'm an environmental economist. That's where I got my PhD. Although I did not have a straight path to that training, my first degree is actually in philosophy and formal logic and theory of science, and then I did a very interdisciplinary master degree in environmental change that is actually quite similar to, I think, the master degree that we offer here at Berkeley. So I'm a late joiner of the econ tribe. I work primarily on climate change topics through an economic lens, but in a quite interdisciplinary way with climate scientists and ethicists and a lot of other disciplines. I think in terms of sort of concrete projects, the area that I currently spend most time on is that I build numerical models that are used to do cost-benefit analysis of climate policies. So these are essentially computer models that combine insights from economics and climate science and impact research and demography and GDP forecasting and all sorts of disciplines, and we combine them and then try to use them to estimate the costs and benefits of a given climate proposal. These models play an important role certainly in the U.S. federal climate policy context. The model that I've been working on has been used for over a decade by EPA to estimate the climate benefits of all regulation they do in terms of climate regulations. Right now, President Biden issued an executive order at the first day in office that he wanted an update of one of the key numbers in this space, the social cost of carbon. So my lab and my team and I are on the phone with EPA every week, working crazy hours at the moment, solving these kinds of questions. So the work I do in that space is very, very intertwined with policy work that is really quite impactful. So that's one area of my work. I have a second area of my work is that I'm really interested in questions of ethics and fairness and equity in cost-benefit analysis. So in a standard cost-benefit analysis, you just look at the size of the economic pie, but you do not care how it is divided between individual people. So in a standard cost-benefit analysis, whether you have a $10 benefit that goes to Bill Gates or a $10 benefit that goes to a poor student, from a cost-benefit analysis point of view, that is equivalent. And that is really hard and inappropriate for cost-benefit analysis at the planetary level in this type of way we're doing this for climate change policy. And so there's a literature on how you can augment standard cost-benefit analysis with equity principles. And I've done applied theoretical work on how you can do that. So this really bridges into philosophy, and then we use a lot of those insights into our practical work with cost-benefit analysis. And some of that work has also made it into the policy world. So the German government, for example, uses that kind of approach for their cost-benefit analysis of climate policy. A third interest that I have is on computational methods in economics. I like to work with computers, and I like to solve math problems that use computers. And so I have a research interest in coming up with better algorithms for certain types of optimizations and that kind of work. And then my final area that I work in is I always call it my second identity, because it has nothing at all to do with climate or energy or resources or anything like that. I'm very active in the scientific open source community. There's a open source programming language called Julia, and I do a lot of work in that space. So I develop packages in the data science space that are used by a lot of people. I maintain the main programming environment for that programming language that started like as a side project, and by now I think we have almost 300,000 users. So this sort of completely spiraled out of control. So I'm very active in open source scientific programming languages. And I think with that I'll stop, because otherwise I already see Eugene and Andy like yeah, all right. So I think this is the overview of what the three of us do. I think we have a first question that fits in really well here. So let me pull that one up. And that's for you, Eugene. Oh, no, actually for both of you, sorry. What types of classes do you teach, and how do you pick TAs for these classes? Do you require that advisees take your courses? Who of you wants to start with that?
Andy, do you want to start, since I
Sure.
began last time?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So I have been teaching a course that's called Climate Science and Society. It's a small graduate seminar. So it's geared towards graduate students. The kind of ethos of the class is that we try to create a peer learning environment where students explore various topics and then kind of share what they're learning with the class. So there's not actually a TA because it's a small graduate seminar. And it is very helpful, I think, if my advisees do take the class, because it's a sort of this broad overview of topics related to the work that I'm doing, but it's not a strict requirement.
Great. Eugene?
Yeah, so I teach a large undergraduate class on gender and environment, and so for those classes I do hire TAs or GSIs or graduate student instructors, they're called at Berkeley. And I've had master's students and PhD students at ERG who work with me on that course. And it's a really great way for them to also learn about my research, because I incorporate a lot of my research into that course. And at the graduate level, I teach a smaller seminar on agrarian questions. So if you're interested in issues of food and agriculture, that's a class that I really recommend students to take. I think it's generally good idea for advisees to take their advisors courses, because they get a sense of how they're thinking about that particular field, how they're engaging with that field, and that way you can also interact more closely on a regular basis with the faculty. So if the students that are taking my agrarian question seminar, for the final paper, many of them writing the paper as kind of a first draft towards their master's thesis or a component of the dissertation. So I provide a lot of hands-on guidance throughout that process as well.
Great, thank you. We have another question, and this one is for me, so I'll just take that one. And the question is, the underlying social justice theories in equity research seems to be a little unclear and overlooked in climate change area. How would you define your social justice philosophy? Yeah, so I agree. I think, and so I should say, I'm approaching this from an economic lens, and I think the social justice theories are even weaker, because that, at least in sort of most mainstream economics, that's just not a focus these days. So the work that we do, at the moment, is primarily rooted in utilitarianism or utilitarian theories of equity and justice. That is a pretty natural and easy fit with how economists think about climate econ problems. So it's not the standard approach in econ, but it is easily incorporated. It's not that you have to sort of completely bridge languages and so on. I'm very well aware that if you go to a philosophy department and say utilitarianism is how we should do is they would not agree, right? There are many other approaches in ethics and philosophy, but at the moment, at least in the econ world, it's already difficult to establish that something like utilitarianism is an appropriate framing. So that's, I think, where the research that I'm doing is most active right now. I'm quite interested in broadening that out. So if a student wants to work on that, that would be fantastic. But I think at the moment the work we've done and that has actually made it out of the academic journals, but also to some degree into the policy space, is all based on utilitarian frameworks. All right, so let's see. We have more questions. Let's take a couple more questions and then move on to our next broad theme. Another one for me, I think. It sounds like you have a substantial engagement in the data science and modeling space. Could you speak some on the data opportunities with the ERG or ERG MPP concurrent program? Yes, I think I can. And then Andy probably also has views on that. So I think if you're interested in data science broadly, then Berkeley and ERG are fantastic places. Data science is clearly a top priority for the campus right now. There's a new college of data science being started. They are getting a fancy new building, but they already have all the classes and instructional programs up and running. ERG is quite linked to all of those efforts. So there are multiple ERG faculty that are linked into these data science initiatives on campus. The environmental and climate space are clearly also a priority for the data science side initiatives on campus. So this is sort of a mutual partnership between ERG and the data science initiative. So I think if that's a topic you're interested in, you will find like an enormous amount of opportunities here on campus. I don't know, Andy, do you want to add something to that?
Sure, I'll just add that at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, where I'm also affiliated, there's a very large push towards increased use of data science, machine learning, and AI right now. And so I think there are a number of opportunities that are going to be sort of coming along the way in that. And I mentioned this urban field laboratory concept. That's one where a big part of that would be collecting novel observations on infrastructural and human behavior in urban environments and using data science tools to understand what's going on there. So there's a lot of opportunities in that space.
Okay, great. So I would say we move on. We have a lot of questions actually in the chat. One thing that is, I had expected that this being the fourth live stream, we would have the lowest viewership. But it's actually the opposite. We have more viewers today than in any of the previous, and we're getting more questions. So I would say we go back to the themes that I had prepared originally, but we try to maybe move through them relatively quickly, and then we can take more questions from the chat. So I think the next theme that I wanted to talk about is how can students, both master and PhD students, participate in our work, and why don't you start this time, Andy?
Sure. So I think the one really great way to participate in the work that I'm doing is to participate in my lab group. So I've been hosting a lab that is joint between ERG and some of my collaborators at Berkeley Lab. So it's kind of a unique environment that's sort of about half students and half scientists from Berkeley Lab. And we've been just taking turns sharing what we're working on and getting feedback from the group and sort of starting to develop a set of shared practices and perspectives. I think also earlier there was a question about taking my class, and I think that's also a great way to get familiar with the kinds of frameworks and questions that I'm engaging with. And then there are always sort of new opportunities to participate in research projects coming up, and sort of as new projects evolve and as opportunities arise. And I think that is sort of just a kind of on an individual basis. If there's a good fit with some of the projects that are happening, then we can arrange those sorts of opportunities.
Great. Eugene?
Yeah, I think there are different students can work with me on a number of different capacities. And so if I have a grant or a fellowship for a project, then I could recruit a funded, graduate research assistant, graduate student research, a GSR, as you're known here, on a particular project. So I had 3 research assistants to date who have worked with me on the livestock project, and anticipate being able to recruit more in the future. And it's also possible for me to hire a student over the summer on a particular project that haven't been able to move forward. So if students are interested in working with me on any other projects, they can reach out and see if there are opportunities for them. And as I mentioned, I think taking classes with me or GSIing for my classes, TAing for my classes is also a good idea to get a sense of the research that I do and find ways to engage.
Great. And now we turn to me, and I'll respond to the same question. So yeah, I think like in Eugene's case, graduate students can work in. I play different roles for different graduate students in my advising. So I have some students where we co-author papers, and it's really like a team effort. So we work on the same, on a joint paper or something like that. And that has happened both with PhD and with master students. And then that kind of collaboration is very close. We meet multiple times a week, and we're a team effort working on that. For other students that have topics that are less closely related to my research, I really actually enjoy advising on those projects as well. That's less of a hands-on advising role then, that is more like a check-in every couple of weeks, how things are going. And normally those students have someone else on campus also who might be more of a subject matter expert, but I try to give guidance and so on. So it really very much depends on individual students. So this ranges from more of a mentoring role that I sometimes play to, co-authors, what I do there. I think one thing that is also so I do a lot of policy outreach work, and I try to pull students in. So all the work that we're doing right now with EPA, there are actually a lot of ERGs involved at all stages. I think, which is really exciting, right? So we have currently, a PhD student who's working with me right now is one of the persons who is doing most of the work for this major initiative of the federal government. So that's sort of a really great opportunity for people to have a real impact outside of academia, doing academic work, actually. Yeah, and then I also I teach a large class in climate change economics, and that has a lot of teaching assistants. So I normally hire somewhere between 5, 6, or 7 teaching assistants per year, and I always try to hire ERG students first, both PhD and master students. So that's also a fun way to interact. Yeah, I think that's sort of what I have on this one. I'm completely losing track here of the chat. It's too much, but keep it coming. This is fantastic. I'm just going to take some random questions from the chat here. They are not thematically linked to what we're discussing right now, and then we'll go back to my next sort of broad theme that I wanted to talk about. So here's a question. Could you suggest some books, authors to read for prospective students to get some insights beforehand? Does anyone want to? I mean, I think, to be honest, there is no one book that we're too diverse in our interests. I mean, you can see this from the 3 of us, right? The range of interests we span here. I don't think there is one book that unites our interests or anything like that, right? So I think ERG is really open for so many different paths and interests that I don't think there's one book. I don't know, Andy or Eugene, do you have other thoughts on this, or?
Yeah, I think my question would be to whoever asked that question is sort of, what are you interested in? You know, I think yes, it sort of depends on where your interests lie and what you want to be preparing yourself for.
Yeah. But I think this is sort of one key message, right? We don't have like set topics that we're looking for in applications, or we don't have like, this is what you need to be firm on in applications. We value getting applications that are on really diverse topic, and if we get an application and someone wants to work on something that we've not seen or heard before, we're excited, right? That is not, our reaction is not, oh, this doesn't fit in here. That's not how this works here.
Yeah, I think if you were to apply for a straight up kind of disciplinary program, like with the historical canons, that might be a little bit different. But I think, as Andy and David had said, I think it really depends on which field you're interested in. And I'm assuming, if you have a book that really moved you in some ways and maybe helped shape your thinking around environmental issues, you could maybe talk about them in your application materials and maybe explain, so that we can better understand like where you're coming from.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. Okay, I'll just move on to the next one. I would like to understand if all doctoral research projects would have to have a link to energy for a place at ERG. Also, how much interest and resource you have on issues around inequality. Who wants to go? I can also start. I mean, no. We have many students that have no link to energy. Energy is an important topic here, but it's. I think, that's fair to say, right? I don't even think like half the students that we have work on energy. We are a great place to work on energy, but we work on many other things. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's. Oh, yeah. I could just add in that, yes, agree that it's absolutely not a requirement that you work on energy. And there are many students, and many of the topics in my group are not specifically energy related, though we are working on energy resilience in the face of climate change, is one of our topics. With respect to inequality, this is an area where I think there's a really increasingly strong interest from students and from society to understand the implications, especially in this climate adaptation and resilience space. And it's a place where I think, particularly, I mentioned a couple times this urban related work that we're doing, where we're really looking at very high resolution, neighborhood by neighborhood. What are the heat risks associated with climate change? What are the flood risks associated with climate change? And there's a real opportunity there to understand how different households and different community members, not only what are their differential vulnerabilities, but also the option space for adaptation and increasing resilience to those stressors, how it varies across social scales and geographic scales. So I think that's definitely a topic that's central to the way that my group is thinking about these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't work on energy directly per se, and some of my students work on energy issues, some of them don't. And so I think you're free to kind of imagine what your project could look like within the broader kind of resource and environment space. And in terms of the interest and resources on inequality, I work on issues around this topic, and so do I think many others embedded in their work. I think all of us are interested and passionate about issues of equity, justice, and access. And so you'll find plenty of people, faculty, and students who are interested in these issues.
Yeah, I actually, now thinking about it, I said sort of our interests in ERG are so diverse, but I think maybe actually equity and justice is maybe one of the common themes and threads that I think every faculty here actually has to some degree incorporated into their research. Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
It's just probably also worth mentioning that at university-wide, there was in the past year this cluster hire in climate equity and environmental justice. So there's something on the order of 8 new faculty, one of which is Meg Mills-Navoa, who's in ERG, but also in the College of Environmental Design and Civil Engineering and Sociology. There's a number of new faculty who have been hired as part of this university-wide initiative on climate equity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a new question. I'm interested in behaviors related to sustainability, eco-psychology. I'm not seeing these topics on faculty bios. Who might be a good fit? So I have I don't know, Andy and Eugene, I don't know specific person pops into my mind right now. I don't know whether you have a name that comes to your mind. If so, shout it out. But I have a generic comment on this, and that is but Andy, I think you might have a name. Are you?
A name of I'm sorry, faculty at Berkeley.
Yeah.
I don't actually. I will say that this is a topic we do 2 weeks on cognitive and behavioral perspectives in my climate science and society class, and it's a topic that personally I'm very interested in, though it's somewhat new to be engaging with this perspective. But I mentioned that we're interested in the actionability of science, producing actionable science, and so that begs the question of how do people actually act based on science, and that brings in questions of identity and trust, and how do human brains work to think about multiple futures. So we have been bringing that theme into my class. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. And we also have someone who's coming for our colloquium next week who works in this space as well.
Yeah. I think one other point. So one thing to just highlight here is if you want to work on something and you don't see one of the core faculty working on that topic, on the ERG homepage, a lot of students here actually work on topics with faculty outside of ERG. So we have a very large affiliate network of faculty. So those are faculty whose primary appointment is not in ERG, but they are primarily appointed in a different department here on campus. But they have partnered with ERG in the past. They have advised ERG students in the past, and they're generally inclined to work with ERG students. And many of them are actually really keen to work with ERG students because ERG students have a great reputation on campus. And so I would actually, in your case in particular, or if you're in a similar situation, I would encourage you to look at the list of affiliate faculties that we have on the ERG homepage and try and see whether there is someone on that list who you think might be a fit, because I think there's really ample opportunity for ERG students to work with faculty across campus and not just within the relatively small group of core faculty in ERG itself. Okay, so let's do the next theme that I had prepared, but let's do it really quickly, and that is what excites you most about ERG? And let's do this like not half a sentence, but like 3 or 4 sentences at most. Eugene, do you want to start it?
Yeah, sure. I think the sense of community and collegiality, I think, is what really the first thing that comes to my mind right now about ERG. And before coming to ERG, I've been in a development sociology department, geography departments, and I've never actually been in the same room with engineers, physicists, economists, ecologists, environmental scientists. I think it's really exciting to be in that same space. And I feel like I'm learning something every day, every week, from both faculty and students, especially through the PhD seminars, getting to know what students are working on. And I think it's an environment that helps foster a mutual kind of understanding for the different epistemological, theoretical, and methodological backgrounds. And I think I get a sense that everyone here is willing to learn from one another. So I would say that's kind of what most excites me about ERG.
Great. Andy?
Yeah, I think similar. I'm really excited in ERG that there's sort of a boundless interdisciplinarity. Not that you have to bring every discipline to a particular problem, but as you're thinking about a question or a problem, when you run into, there was just the question about psychology or cognitive science perspectives. Once we bump into questions that get into psychology, we don't stop there because that's outside of our field. We say, let's explore that and try to understand it from that disciplinary perspective as well, or bring in additional expertise to do that. So, a culture where we are bringing together whatever perspectives and tools are necessary to address problems that are, values-based, equity, sustainability, justice, resilience. That's what's really exciting to me.
Great. All right. So what excites me most about ERG? I think there are lots of things, but I think one is the students. I just love our students. They are fantastic in so many different dimensions. They're interesting. They have interesting biographies. They are smart. They're hardworking. But I think they just are wonderful people. So I just love working with them. I want to second what Eugene said. I've never been in a community or an organization where there's so much sense of community and working together and mutual respect for what everyone does. It's and especially in interdisciplinary departments, sometimes this ends up as being faculty from different disciplines being thrown together, but then really they sneeze at each other and say, what is that person doing in terms of methods? And we're like the opposite, right? I think there's such a joy that everyone experiences by being exposed to other methods that we are not using from the home discipline that we come from. And I don't know, so just personally, if you want to have a career in academia, at some level, the way to have success is to go really narrow and then become really well known in a very narrow field. That's sort of how you become a professor at some level. And I don't really enjoy that. And ERG is really providing a space where that is not our how we operate. We actually value people that don't take a narrow perspective, and so I just enjoy having found that. So I think that's what I enjoy about ERG. Okay, so let's get to some questions from the chat. This one is for Andy. How do you achieve a balance between addressing fundamental questions and ensuring human benefit? For example, the water producers versus extreme weather.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we have struggled with in the project because, for instance, this water manager project, it's funded by the Department of Energy and it's funded by a fundamental science program. So we basically it's an evolving project, and we've been doing this for 5 years. So somehow between we've sort of arranged the relationship building with the water managers in such a way that we're both getting something out of it. So the research community is learning these kind of fundamental insights about what are the key leverage points in these systems, what are the breaking points of the water infrastructure, so that we can incorporate that into our modeling and in our science. And at the same time, we're asking, what kinds of information is useful to you, and then making sure that we produce some of those data products or try to provide at least guidance on how to use science in a more intelligent or effective way. So there's no easy answer there, but I would say that the depth of the engagement. So it's now been in that particular project 5 years of participating in workshops and focus groups discussions and developing these relationships that over time we're both sides of that equation. We're getting something out of it.
Great, thank you. And then I'll just go to the next question. Eugene, this one is for you. Would you be able to expand on how you conduct your ethnographies and your participatory photography research? Do students get the opportunity to travel to Tanzania, East Africa? I assume with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So ethnography, there are many different types and styles or approaches to ethnography. But the way I approach ethnography, it's a long-term immersive field work, with the communities that you're working with. So for instance, where I worked in Tanzania, in coastal Tanzania, I've done 18 months of field work. So kind of spending time with them, talking to them, hanging out with them, cooking with them, weeding with them, and doing things to observe how their day-to-day life unfolds and how their experiences of, say, investments or interactions with government government authorities are shaped through everyday life. And the participatory photography, that has a lineage in documentary photography, critical pedagogy, and feminist standpoint theory. So it's really about engaging the research participants that you work with directly into the data collection process, especially through the production of visual data. And so for that work, I provide cameras to my research participants. We have a workshop on kind of the basic photography, and I usually give participants a broad prompt. And so in the land grabbing project that I worked on, so the communities that I worked with, they were living with the expectation that they will be displaced quite soon. And so they were given the prompt, kind of the broad prompt, how does living on the land with uncertainty look like? And so they would collect photographs, and they would then we would meet, and we would do what are called photo elicitation interviews. So looking at the photographs and kind of seeing what kind of ideas, reflections come out from those photographs to further inform the research process. So far, I haven't had students accompany me to Tanzania, but I hope to be able to provide that opportunity. And I apply for a grant, and if that is funded, there will be an opportunity for that for sure.
Great. All right, and then I'll pick one question for myself. Could you expand a bit on your work on open source tools? How do you work on them, and how do you integrate social justice and equity ethics into these tools? Yes. So I think this is there are different stories for different things that I work on. So some of the open source tools that I work on are not specific on specific even research domains or anything like that, right? So I maintain the main editor for an open source programming language that you use to program in that programming language. That is not related to any that's used by engineers, economists, ecologists. It's like, I don't even know who's using that anymore because it's so widely adopted. The way I work on that is I work like any other open source contributor. I'm on GitHub. I open pull requests. I write code, and I interact and discuss with other people on the internet. It's actually a very different way of operating than many other things. So people form groups randomly on the internet and work together on things and become friends and work on projects for many years together. And I try to, what I've done a fair bit is help students work on these projects as well, integrate them into the community. So I've done that kind of stuff. I also, all the work I do on climate economics and ethics questions, the numerical work is also all open source. So that is sort of domain specific and, in climate change. And I think the open source nature of that work has really helped quite a bit. So, just a sort of a very concrete example, the work that we've done for EPA that they use to estimate this central social cost of carbon is all based on the computing platform that we built here at Berkeley, and it's all open source. And the US federal EPA is not using these equity principles that I hinted at previously in their cost-benefit analysis. But because everything now was open source, it was actually very easy for other entities to go in there, use the same underlying estimates of costs and benefits, and then look at the effects of introducing equity into something like that. And so having those kinds of tools easily available as open source can enable that kind of research, that someone who wants to take a different ethical perspective can relatively easily, hook into these kinds of questions. So that's maybe my answer for that question. All right, let's see where we are. Still lots of questions. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to the next theme I've prepared, and then we'll go back to the chat and try to get as many questions from the chat answered, and I'm going to skip the fifth theme that I had prepared. So the fourth question I have for Eugene and Andy and myself is, can you give some examples of what students you work with do after ERG? And there's a caveat here again, because both Eugene and Andy joined ERG relatively recently. So this is I think we had the same situation with Meg. There was even more unfair, this question to Meg, who had just joined us a couple of weeks ago. But I think a similar caveat applies to both Eugene and Andy. But let's start with Eugene this time.
Yeah, so as David said, I haven't had students graduate from ERG just yet, but the students that I've worked with in my previous institution have gone on to, further graduate school work. Some have gone into community-based work and food systems. One of them has gotten a postdoc position in geography, and so I think they go in different directions. And I think I would encourage that. I mean, I myself have had nonprofit experience before kind of coming to academia, and that's what I initially wanted to do after finishing my PhD, but things didn't work out the way you planned to, and your ideas changed. And so I'm supportive of students looking for divergent pathways than what's typically expected of a PhD.
Great. Andy?
Yeah, so I actually started advising ERG students before I was a faculty member. So I've had 2 PhD students graduate, both of whom are now working at a national lab, at Berkeley National Lab. So I guess they've gone on to do research-oriented careers, though I know that some of the students I'm working with now are quite interested in more kind of public policy or kind of think tank or kind of being on the programmatic side of defining research agendas going forward. So I think that'll be interesting to see. There's certainly a history of ERG students going into those diverse career paths. So it'll be interesting to see how some of those students end up faring.
Great. All right, and I can say a little bit about this as well. So I started in ERG in 2014, so I've had a few PhD students finish that I've advised finish their degree, and a lot of master students that I've advised finish ERG. So the PhD students that I've advised, they did very well. I had 2 PhD students who went on to postdocs at Harvard, one who went on to a postdoc at Princeton. They're looking for academic positions now, so we'll see how their careers progress after their postdocs, but at least sort of the next step after ERG, I think, went really well for them. In terms of master students, they've really gone into very, very different careers. So I've had master students that went into the private financial sector, for example, around sustainability, sustainable finance. I had master students go into local government in California. So there's really there's no pattern. I think, especially with our master students, I think the pattern is that they go out into the world and work in positions where they can really make a difference and help, solve all the sustainability and equity and justice problems that we have in the world. So, and that's great, right? I really enjoy the diversity of career paths there. All right. Let's use our last 6 minutes to just go through questions. I'm not even going to try to filter. I'm just going to do one after another. We have about 10 questions right now, I think, that are unanswered. Okay, first question is, I'm a petroleum graduate and I hope to help support the decarbonization efforts of oil and gas industry. I wanted to understand if a master's in this course would help me achieve this goal. I would say yes. I think we've had many ERG students from the oil and gas industry that use this master as a pivot, essentially. All right, so I'll just go to the next one. If we answer this quickly, then we'll maybe get through all of them. I'm wondering if you can describe your partnership with practitioners in community-based groups. Can you speak to any interdisciplinary work with humanities departments? Who wants to take this one?
I can speak to number 1. Yeah, as I mentioned a couple times, we have this project that is been engaging with water resource managers, and that's now expanded to electricity sector and land use managers as well. So this has been kind of this ongoing set of conversations and dialogues between a climate science research team and a set of resource managers who are, getting to know each other. And somebody asked before, so how do you balance the fundamental science questions with the practice-based science questions? And one thing that came up for me is that, the expectations for that evolve as we get to know each other and learn from one another. So we had one practitioner who said, I thought I was going to get this data set that I needed, but what I actually got was insight that made me a better consumer of data writ large. And this is so much more valuable than me getting like the one data set. And I'll also say that, I've also been involved with a number of activities outside of my research to sort of help push the larger community forward towards doing more engaged and practice-oriented science. So I've participated in a few workshops. I helped organize these workshops through the Aspen Global Change Institute and through an organization called the Science for Climate Action Network. And all of these activities have been geared towards bringing practitioners and researchers together to kind of define what are some of the challenges at the interface of practice and knowledge generation, and how do we move forward in terms of creating more institutions for climate services and applied knowledge creation. So there's some pretty big issues there around workforce development and kind of professional creating a professional class of people who can be these boundary spanners to support all the information needs as we have to adapt every aspect of our society to climate change. But I'll stop there because I know we have a lot of questions.
Great. Yeah, and I think really quickly on the humanities, maybe we've strengthened that part actually in our curriculum. So this is like a core requirement now. I don't know, Eugene, do you want to say something on that, or should we just move on to the next question?
I can say a little bit about the first question. So in Tanzania, where I work, so previously I had worked at a development or non-governmental organization, so I still have maintained contact with them as I was doing my work, and so we would share our research findings to better inform policy or local campaigns around issues. And I'm also working with beginning to have conversations with local community groups around small-scale miners and to better address human rights issues that are quite rampant in the mining industry. And so they're quite involved in the research process. And for the humanities, and as David said, we do have a humanities requirement for the curriculum, and I work in the field of humanistic social sciences, and I encourage students, I think, also to reach out to students in humanities department to build kind of different kinds of worldviews around environmental questions.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to pick a couple of questions, and let's try to answer them really, because I think they can get one sentence answers. Here's a question: apart from your project for EPA at the national level, is there any cooperation between ERG and more local or state level policies? I think the answer is a lot. I think I'm probably the most, so I'm not that hooked into state level or local level topics, but I'm more the exception, I think, than the rule actually in ERG. So some of us work very international, some of us work, Eugene, I think most of your work is international, I would probably fair to say, right? Some people work at the national level, and some people really work a lot on local issues. So I think there's really the whole, and UC Berkeley traditionally has a really strong links to California topics. Yeah. And then we have Dan Kamen, who works on all levels. So if you're interested in that, you can watch that video with him. Then there's a question. Thank you for the session. I would like to know if there's currently any research focused on waste management and biofuels, and whether that has been discussed in previous sessions. Andy, do you want to do a one-sentence answer?
Definitely. Yeah, there's a few ERG students who are working precisely on that topic right now, and I think some of them are collaborating. This is another example of collaboration with faculty outside of the ERG core faculty. So Wendy Silver in SBOM, I know, is leading a project that is looking at some of those issues and has been working with at least 2 students that I'm aware of.
Okay, great. So we are at time, and as a German, it gives me great joy to be on time. So I think I will, we will end this here. We still have unanswered questions. We'll try to, please. Okay, so first of all, thank you, Eugene and Andy, for joining me today. This was very interesting. I learned things as well. So thanks for coming. And I think thank you everyone for tuning in and watching our final live stream. Thank you for all the questions. They were great. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of them. There are even more fantastic questions here. Let me give you sort of a couple of hints of or pointers on where you can get more information after this session if you still have questions. I think your first stop should be the ERG homepage. Look at the admissions page there. There's an email address, erggrad@berkeley.edu. And you can email that email address with any question you have, and Candice and Julian will try to answer your questions there. So that should be your first hook. I would encourage, you can actually ask to be put in touch with current ERG students via that email address. I would encourage you to use that. It's interesting to hear what faculty say about a program, but I think you actually get an even better sense about ERG from our current students, and that is one way that you can be put in touch with our current student body. And then finally, we have 3 more of these type videos. They're all on YouTube. If you're watching this video, you already found ERG's YouTube channel. That's where you can find these recordings, and so I encourage you to watch those videos as well. And with that, thank you for tuning in. I hope these were helpful. This is a bit of an experiment for us to do these live streams. Let us know how this goes. Good luck with your application. I hope to read as many interesting applications from you as I can. Bye-bye.